How's it going, guys? Brian from Apex Detail here. Today's going to be the third installment of Mail Call. And the first two installments were dedicated videos for a single question. Today I'm going to answer multiple questions that came in through emails, texts, voicemail, some questions in the comment section under videos, previous videos. Let's start with this one here. Richard from New York. He's working on a 2018 Yukon. Doing an interior and exterior clean, wash, clay, polish, and sealant is $600 too much. I get a lot of questions on pricing. Guys, the best way I can go about telling you what to do in your area, because prices vary state to state, region to region, and within 15 miles from here, they may not be able to get away with what I charge here in my area. So this is what you do. In your area, you get three competitors that do pretty much the same thing you do. You go on their website and take the average of the prices for that service from those three competitors. And you don't want to be the most expensive, but you also do not want to undercut, and you do not want to be the cheapest in the area, because this is the type of work that you will attract. So, for an example, if the average for that type of service is $350, charge $360, $370. You're right within that range. You're not the most expensive, outpricing everybody, but you're not undercutting everybody either and attracting all of that crap work. And I hope that helps. I can't just blurt out a price, because what I can get away with here, you might not be able to get away with there, and it might be just too cheap in your area elsewhere. Okay, next question from Detailing Junkie. The plastic trim, or what looks to be plastic but feels like rubber trim around windows. All right, that's a good question. If it's hard plastic, especially if it goes up and down through the pillars or around the windows and it's hard, you can actually polish them by hand or by a small machine with a soft application or finish pad, using something like a cleaner polish, a non-staining cleaning polish like Angel Wax Perfect Polish. What I do after that, I'll clean it up and follow up with Tack Moonlight to both rejuvenate and protect the area. Next question from Greg. Can I use a DA to wet sand? Absolutely. They actually make dedicated DAs for wet sanding that have a continuous feed of water moisture to keep the sandpaper on the pad flushed and keep it clean. Then you don't have pigtails. So yeah, you absolutely can. I personally like to do it by hand every time. Doesn't matter what grit I'm using. I like the tactile feedback that I'm getting back from the surface, and it tells me a lot. And that feedback, not only do I like to get back from wet sanding, but also polishing. For an example, if I'm using a wool pad, I don't use those real big, thick wool pads you see, the 7 inches. Guys, I used those back in the 80s. I don't want to ever see them again. I like the more lower profile, lower pile wool pad. I can get a feedback from the surface, and after doing so many cars over so many years, it really does give me a lot of information on what type of surface and clear coat I'm working on. I hope that makes sense. But yes, you can absolutely use a DA to wet sand. I would just stick to larger panels, flat panels. Anything with curvature, contours, body lines, go with the blocks. Go with the little block that I kept. Another good question I keep getting is, where did I get the block that I used to attach the Trizac disc to? I kept that block from a 3M headlight restoration kit. You can also make those. There's a Michael Craft store in my area. You can get foam, cut it in a circle, glue some hook and loop on there, 3-inch. You can make it 5-inch. Whatever pad you like to order, and you can make it ready to use for you. Next question from Daniel. Brian, I see you like using pneumatic tools. What air compressor do you have at your shop? What do you recommend, however, for a mobile detailer? Daniel, I have the DeWalt 30-gallon vertical. That is 155 psi. It is 100% continuous, which means I can use a pneumatic tool if it's just me throughout the whole day continuously, and it will just kick on every once in a while. Back at the old shop, I did have a 60-gallon Ingersoll Rand that was a 5 horsepower, and I had outlets throughout the shop with regulators, you know, the whole spiel. But now that I downsized, that 30-gallon does me just fine. I can operate whatever I want to operate all day long, and I have no problem with it. Now, for a mobile detailer, and I don't think you'll be using an air tool continuous throughout the day. I could be wrong, but I would just recommend something like a Cobalt 20-gallon will do you just fine. You know, operating a small 2-inch pneumatic polisher, or maybe some of the air tools like the Tornador, or just the air gun, or the air foamer from Griot's Garage. That would work perfectly fine. The next question actually comes from multiple sources, and that's on paint depth gauges and gloss meters. I'm going to cover both of those issues in a dedicated video, because that's going to take quite some time to explain what they are, how they work, what you should look into, and how to utilize them. When it comes to paint depth gauges, unless you're spending $4,000 or $5,000 for the Felsco that can read all 3 layers on any type of material, fiberglass, rubber, you're going to be getting a cheaper one that will read the total depth of all layers on metal surfaces. You can utilize those. You could be very successful once you figure out how to utilize a cheaper machine like that. Especially important if a car comes in and you don't know the history of it. You can use that type of gauge to, it'll tell you a story of the car. Has it been repainted? Does it have filler in? If you're working a side of the car and taking readings, and you have, you know, a nice fluid reading of 5.1, 5.3, 5.2, and then the next panel it jumps to 12.3, you have filler in there. Or if it jumps from 5.7 to 7.7, the vehicle has more than likely had you know, either work done to it and has been repainted, or it's been worked and it's been shaved in certain areas. So those gauges will tell you a story, and you don't have to have the most expensive one for paint depth. And I'll cover that. I'll do a dedicated video in detail on that. When it comes to gloss meters, they also help, especially if you're walking around the car with the customer when it first comes in, to get numbers behind what you're trying to tell him, what you're trying to sell. They're not always the most accurate things, and that's because they work off the reflection of a surface and how flat it is. And depending on what you have on your car to protect it, it can throw it off. Depending on the type of finish or what type of texture you're trying to get a reading from, can throw it off. So again, I'm going to do a dedicated video on gloss meters as well. They can be tricky, but once you get some experience with them, they can be very useful, and you can utilize them to your favor. John from Florida. I saw in one of your series you were working on rock chips and you were using a filler. What type of filler was that? Actually, John, that was just a simple glazing spot putty. I want to do a dedicated video on that type of rock chip repair. I did one on the Dr. Color chip, but that is for lower budget tier packages that I have to send them out quickly. To do it correctly, you're probably going to have a car for a few days, because it is a time-consuming job. I don't enjoy rock chip repair because it's so tedious. It is a fill wet sand process. You don't have to use this. I'll give you a quick tip as to what I use if I want to speed up the process, and that is to use super glue to fill in. Yes, super glue. It actually adheres quite well into those little craters of the chip. I'll do a dedicated video on it. I'll show you how I then level, a speedy way to level, and what I use then to flatten out and wet sand the surface. Strip sanding. What is strip sanding? I will cut different sheets, different grits of sandpaper into strips, this thick, this long. Say this little spot here is where you're working on the rock chip. Strip sanding, I'm going to place the strip of sandpaper right on top of the chip filler that I'm trying to level. keep my finger down on it and pull up the strip, and it just spot sands right there on top of the area you're trying to level out and nothing else. And it really saves the clear coat that's around that rock chip from shaving that too close. I will show you in greater detail in a dedicated video. Just be patient and stay tuned. The next question is from Dave. He wants to know how to work and clean around the edges of PPF, which is paint protection film. I just recently bought a car that has film here and there seems to be a white residue around the edges. That's either a wax or a sealant, and I'll show you what I use here. I actually believe I showed that in the beginning of the series I'm just working on. And the first thing I'll grab are these little swabs. These are paint chip swabs, what I use to fill in paint chips. But they are also really neat if you soak them in alcohol and gently work the edges of the PPF. This will clean it out. If it's really stubborn, what I'm going to reach for then is this paddle skewer here. I have different size skewers for that type of job and getting in and around real tight areas to clean out residue. The tips of the skewers are firm enough yet soft enough that they will have give and they won't scratch the paint, but will get the most, how can I say, stubborn residue out from the edges of that PPF without lifting it or scratching the paint. You also have to use common sense. Yeah, if you'd really jab this into the surface of the car, it will do some damage. But just use some common sense and you'll be fine. Next question from Brian. Are you going to be reviewing the new Udos polisher from Lake Country when it comes out? That is due to come out the third or fourth quarter of this year, so soon, but in limited quantities, and then full distributorship in 2020, and I will review it whenever I can get my hands on one, absolutely. This is a polisher that is a 5-in-1. It'll have an 8mm throw, 12, 15, and 21, and can also be used as a rotary. Without having tried it, would I recommend it? If you just want to use a rotary cut and then something to finish, no, because you can get both of those for half the price of what this is going to be. If you plan on having every one of those tools in your arsenal, then yeah, I would definitely look into it, but stay tuned. I will have a detailed review and showcase on the polisher. We're going to take a look at how it performs and the build. I'm going to look at it inside and out. We're going to tear that thing down to the last nut and bolt. I'll throw the warranty to the wind and take the hit myself so I can show you, is the build worth $700? We'll find out. Okay, good friends, time is up already. That's going to do it for this edition of Mail Call. I'm going to continue these in both forms, both dedicated video forms and also this form here where I directly answer your questions the best I can. I really do think it helps. I hope it helps. Let me know down in the comments section and keep those questions flowing. The more subscribers I get, the harder it is to keep up with them, but I am trying. I do have a full schedule, and this is, YouTube isn't my full-time gig here. I do have 3 different companies that I'm trying to keep rolling, and I will get back to you as quick as I can. Your questions, every single one of them are important, and I really feel terrible when I can't get back to them. So I'm trying to do the best I can. All I ask of you is just one thing, and that is to be patient. Thanks a lot, guys. I really do love you all. Catch you in the next video. If you're enjoying the content on the channel, like, subscribe, share, hit that notification bell, and there's much more to come.